Masha and the Bear, a Russian popular tale. Once upon a time, long ago, there lived a good old man and a good old woman with their granddaughter named Mashenka. One day, Masha's friends invited her to go with them to the woods to pick up wild strawberries. "Grandfather, grandmother," the little girl asked, "may I go for a walk in the forest with my friends?" "Yes, you may," they answered, "but be careful. Don't stray away from the other girls, otherwise you might get lost." The girls arrived in the woods, where everywhere the ground was strewn with fragrant and, oh, how delicious red berries. Picking them up, the girls gradually separated from one another. After a while, Masha found herself quite alone in the deepest thicket of the forest. "What is to become of me in this forest all alone? What will my grandfather and grandmother think when they see that I am not coming back? I'm going to die of hunger and thirst in these woods unless the wolves eat me during the night." She started to shout. Many a time she called her friends, but nobody answered. She was too far from the others, and she became really frightened. She would look to the right, she would look to the left, and she realized that she was lost, and that she stood no chance to find her way back home. She walked at random for a very, very long time, and after many a weary mile, after long hours of loneliness, Masha saw an isba. She knocked at the door. No answer. She pushes the door. The door opens with a creak. Who lives here?" she asked herself. She was getting more and more surprised. She steps into the isba, sits down on a small bench near the window, and began to cry bitterly. She cried for a long time, but at last tiredness was stronger than grief. She set her pretty head over her hand and went to sleep, overcome with weariness. Masha slept all afternoon. No wild bees disturbed her sleep. She did not suffer from the cold. And when she woke up in the evening, she rubbed her eyes, and she was very surprised to find herself in an old isba instead of her bedroom and her bed. She called, "Is there anybody here?" The rough voice of a wild bear answered her. Puzzled and rather frightened, she saw a big, very big bear. The bear was glad to have a visitor, for it did not happen very often. "Ah," he said, "what is your name, and what are you doing here?" My name is Masha, and I've got lost in your forest. Could you please, Mr. Bear, take me back to my grandparents, who must be greatly pained by my absence? The bear shook his head and roared plaintively. Oh, you do understand me, Big Bear, Mashenka said. So take pity on me and lead me back where I live, so that I shan't die of hunger and cold and fright in this horrible forest. The bear looked at her, and nodding his big head, he made a sign that meant niet. Oh, Mr. Bear, what is it you mean? What do you want to tell me? I shall show you the way to your grandparents' house. Yes, but not at once. As I am quite alone here, I often get bored. Stay with me for a while. You will light up the fireplace, prepare and cook the dinner for me. But let me warn you, if you try to run away, I shall catch you anyway, and I shall eat you. This is my forest, and I know it by heart. What? Exclaimed Masha. Shan't I ever see my grandfather and my grandmother again? Poor people, I'm so fond of them. Dear Masha, of course you will see them again, but not yet. Meanwhile, be good and obedient. Wisdom always brings its reward. As for me, I'll do all I can to make you happy here. Masha heaved a sigh and shed a few tears. She thought that it was ungrateful and a bad reaction to this big bear's kindness and hospitality. So she checked herself and tried to talk as gaily as she could. So every morning the bear would go for the day and did not return before evening had set in. Mashenka would remain alone in the izba, and she did not dare to run away. She did not know the way out of the forest, and there was nobody to ask. She pondered a lot. How could she escape the bear's notice? She thought and pondered, and one day she said, Dear Mr. Bear, I have been at your place for several days. Please, let me go for one day to see my poor grandparents, who must be overwhelmed with grief. I want to bring them some presents, some delicious pierogi, some apple pies stuffed with wild strawberries. Niet, the bear replied. You are going to get lost in the forest. Give me your presents. I shall take them myself. That was exactly what Masha wanted. She prepared the pies, stuffed with delicious and fragrant wild strawberries, and put them into a huge wicker basket, which the bear was to carry on his back and asked him with a mischievous voice, "I have made the piroshkis and put them in this basket. But remember, do not open the basket. Do not eat the pies. I'm going to climb a big oak tree and watch you. They are not for you. They are presents for my grandparents." And she added, "By the way, is it raining outside?" The bear went out to see, and when he came back, Masha had already slipped into the big basket, and she held the tray of pies above her head. The bear took the basket on his back and went in the direction of the village. He walked and began to feel tired. Within the basket were lots of piroshki and also Masha. It was heavy, and the bear soon thought that it was time for a pause, to have some rest and eat a morsel. "Phew, sitting on a stump, I'm going to eat one of these delicious pies." From within the basket, Masha told him in a distant little voice, sounding like an echo, "I can see everything, bear. Do not sit down on a stump. Do not eat a pie. Take them to my grandmother. Take them to my grandfather." "Well, well," said the bear, surprised. "She can see everything." He went on walking for another hour, and as he walked, the forest became merrier, clearer, the grass got finer, and the flowers grew on his path in greater plenty. Through the meshes of the wicker basket, Mashenka could catch sight of pretty birds that sang and squirrels that climbed up and down the branches of trees. After an indeterminate length of time, after lots and lots of paths, the bear was very hungry, and he thought that Masha could not see him any longer from the top of her big oak. "Phew," he said to himself, "I'm going to sit down on a stump and eat one of these delicious pies." But Masha, from inside the basket, told her in her distant little voice, sounding like an echo, "I can see everything, bear. Do not sit down on a stump. Do not eat a pie. Take them to my grandmother. Take them to my grandfather." "Well, well," said the bear, surprised. "She can see everything. The naughty little girl. She can see me from such a distance." He sighed, got up and resumed his walk still faster. Then he came to the village, found grandfather's and grandmother's house, delivered a strong knock at the door. The dogs heard him, barked at him, and bit him. Quite frightened, the bear dropped the basket and ran away as fast as he could, without turning his head. Hearing the noise, grandfather and grandmother came out of the house. They saw the great basket, opened it. How happy they were to find Masha in it. Grandfather had her to come out of her hiding place and the little girl was so glad to jump on firm ground, to throw herself into his arms. All the three of them stayed in a long embrace. Everybody was crying, but it was for joy.